On October 2nd, 1187, when Jerusalem surrendered peacefully to Salahuddin Ayyubi, many believed his greatest chapter had ended. But in reality, a far more complex and demanding period of his life had just begun. Victory did not bring him rest. It brought responsibility. After reclaiming the holy city, Salahuddin immediately focused on stabilizing the region rather than celebrating triumph. Unlike many conquerors of his time, he did not establish a reign of terror to secure authority. Instead, he implemented structured governance, ensured protection for Christian holy sites, and allowed pilgrims continued access under agreed conditions. His treatment of civilians earned him admiration even among former enemies. Yet, beyond Jerusalem, the political landscape of the Levant remained unstable. Crusader strongholds still held coastal territories such as Tyre, and European powers were preparing retaliation. Salahuddin knew that reclaiming Jerusalem would ignite a massive response from Europe. Throughout late 1187 and 1188, he moved strategically across the region, securing cities like Acre, Nablus, Jaffa, and Beirut, consolidating Ayyubid control. His leadership style during this period reflected discipline and long-term planning rather than emotional triumph. He restructured military garrisons, reinforced defenses, and strengthened supply routes. At the same time, he worked to unify Muslim territories that had long been divided by internal rivalries. His dream was not simply to win battles, but to unite the Muslim world under a stable political and moral vision. However, governing vast lands, from Egypt to Syria, was not easy. Resources were stretched, soldiers were fatigued from campaigns, and political factions within his own territories sometimes disagreed with his centralized control. Despite these pressures, Salahuddin maintained humility in personal life. Historical sources describe him living without excessive luxury, focusing on administration, religious institutions, and justice courts. He funded scholars and restored mosques, especially in Jerusalem, reinforcing spiritual revival after decades of Crusader occupation. Yet even as he worked to strengthen the region, dark clouds gathered in Europe. News of Jerusalem's fall had shocked Christendom. Kings and emperors began mobilizing armies for what would become the Third Crusade. Salahuddin understood the scale of what was coming. The man who had reclaimed Jerusalem now faced the might of Europe itself. In 1189, the long-anticipated response arrived. Europe launched the massive Third Crusade, led by powerful monarchs including Richard the Lionheart, Philip II of France, and Emperor Frederick Barbarossa. For Salahuddin, this was no longer a regional conflict. It became a struggle against some of the most formidable military leaders of the medieval world. The Crusaders first targeted Acre, a strategic coastal city. The Siege of Acre, 1189 to 1191, became one of the most grueling and brutal confrontations of the Crusades. For nearly 2 years, both sides endured disease, hunger, and relentless fighting. Salahuddin attempted multiple times to break the siege, launching attacks against Crusader lines, but the balance of naval power favored the Europeans. Acre eventually fell in 1191, marking one of the most difficult setbacks of his later life. Yet even in loss, his character remained consistent. When Richard executed Muslim prisoners after Acre's surrender, Salahuddin did not respond with indiscriminate revenge. Instead, he recalibrated his military strategy. The battles that followed, particularly the Battle of Arsuf, demonstrated the contrasting styles of the two leaders. Richard was bold and aggressive. Salahuddin was cautious, strategic, and patient. Though Richard achieved tactical victories, he could not retake Jerusalem. Salahuddin's defensive strategy focused on avoiding catastrophic defeat while exhausting Crusader momentum. He understood that preserving Jerusalem was more important than winning every battlefield encounter. Their rivalry, though intense, was marked by mutual respect. When Richard fell ill, Salahuddin reportedly sent physicians, fruits, and even snow to cool his drinks. When Richard lost his horse in battle, Salahuddin sent replacements. These acts were not weakness. They were reflections of chivalric honor rooted in his values. The Third Crusade was not simply a military contest. It became a clash of reputations and ideals. Across the Mediterranean world, Salahuddin's name grew not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of disciplined leadership under pressure. The struggle drained resources and energy on both sides, yet neither achieved total victory. By 1192, both leaders recognized that continued war would only prolong suffering without decisive outcome. On September 2nd, 1192, after years of intense warfare, Salahuddin and Richard agreed to the Treaty of Jaffa. Jerusalem would remain under Muslim control, but Christian pilgrims would be allowed safe access to holy sites. The treaty reflected pragmatic compromise rather than ideological surrender. Salahuddin understood the realities of prolonged war. His armies were exhausted, finances strained, and unity among Muslim territories required stability. The decision to negotiate peace was not born of weakness, but of strategic maturity. By this stage of his life, the years of campaigning had taken a toll on his health. He had spent decades on horseback, in desert heat, in siege camps, and in council chambers. His body bore the strain of constant responsibility. Yet even during peace negotiations, he remained focused on maintaining justice and balance within his domains. He avoided triumphal arrogance. In fact, historians note that he expressed disappointment not at losing battles, but at failing to maintain stronger unity among Muslim rulers. His vision extended beyond territory. He wanted moral and political cohesion. After the Crusaders withdrew, he returned to Damascus. There was no grand palace celebration awaiting him. Instead, administrative duties resumed: tax management, regional disputes, infrastructure repairs, and governance challenges. His empire stretched across Egypt, Syria, parts of Iraq, and Yemen. Yet managing such a vast area required constant oversight. Internally, there were tensions among relatives and regional governors within the Ayyubid dynasty. Salahuddin had always prioritized unity, but maintaining it after prolonged warfare proved difficult. He remained committed to charitable works, frequently donating wealth to the poor and funding religious scholars. Observers describe him as generous to the point of financial imprudence. Wealth passed through his hands quickly, distributed rather than accumulated. This habit reflected his deep spiritual conviction that leadership was a trust, not personal property. By late 1192, exhaustion weighed heavily upon him. The man who had once electrified battlefields now sought quiet stability. Yet his body could not sustain the burden much longer. In early 1193, Salahuddin fell ill in Damascus. What began as fatigue developed into a serious condition, likely fever-related. As he lay in a modest chamber, far simpler than one might expect for a ruler of his magnitude, his final days revealed the true measure of his character. He did not summon displays of royal wealth or dramatic declarations of conquest. Instead, he spent his remaining time in prayer and reflection. His companions noted his calm demeanor, free from fear. On March 3rd, 1193, Salahuddin Ayyubi passed away at the age of 55. The reaction was immediate and profound. Citizens of Damascus wept openly. Soldiers who had followed him across decades of campaigns mourned not just a commander, but a father figure. Perhaps the most striking detail emerged after his death. Despite ruling vast territories, he left behind very little personal wealth, barely enough to cover funeral expenses. Much of what he had earned had been given away in charity. His funeral procession was simple, lacking extravagant royal symbolism. This simplicity cemented his reputation as a leader who valued service above luxury. In the years that followed, both Muslim and Christian chroniclers wrote about him with unusual respect. In Europe, writers described him as noble and honorable, a rare acknowledgement for a rival commander. In the Muslim world, he became a symbol of unity and justice. His victory in Jerusalem remained monumental, but his restraint afterward defined him even more. He proved that conquest did not require cruelty, that power did not require arrogance, and that leadership demanded moral discipline. Over 8 centuries later, his name continues to echo across history classrooms, documentaries, and collective memory. The story of Salahuddin after Jerusalem is not merely about war. It is about responsibility after victory, restraint in power, and humility at the height of fame. His life reminds us that true greatness is measured not by the cities one conquers, but by the principles one refuses to abandon.